and welcome to your stomach contents testing. For today's video, we're going to go over first the test for starch in our stomach contents. So here is a sample of our stomach contents. You can see I've labeled the jar here. This is what we're going to be testing to see whether this stomach contents solution contains starch. Now, just as a reminder, starch is a form of carbohydrate. Starch is more complex than what we'll test next, which is our simple sugar solution. So we're going to start with starch, and once again, we're testing our stomach contents here. So here's the materials that we're going to be using for today's experiment. We're definitely going to be using these stomach contents, so I'm going to leave those there. We're also going to be testing our control today, which is a starch solution. So again, this is our starch solution. It's just cornstarch mixed with water. And we know that this is our control solution because we know that this should have some starch in it. So we should see a positive result here with this solution. The next variable we're going to test here is water. So I've got a simple, just a vial of water here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a means of our control, which means we know for sure that there's no starch in water, right? We know for sure that there should be a negative result here. And what the goal will be then is to take a look at the result from our stomach contents solution and look at that result against a control with water, knowing that yes, we know this should be a negative control, as well as a control with a starch solution, knowing yes, this should be a positive control. Okay, so I'm going to move these aside for the time being, and we're going to pull up some other materials that we're going to be using. I'll just leave those on the side. Here's the instructions that I'm following. There'll be a link for those as well if you'd like to check that out. So for our procedure today, we're going to be using test tubes for our solutions. Now, I've got 3 test tubes here that I'll be using: test tube 1, test tube 2, and test tube 3. Now, these are going to line up with your lab document that you should have shared to you. Okay, so here's our lab document that we're going to be looking at. Now, for me, I'm going to be putting my starch solution into test tube 1. I'm going to be putting my water into test tube 2. And then I'm going to be putting my stomach contents into test tube 3. And I'm going to be indicating a couple of changes that I noticed throughout this experiment. I'm going to begin by writing down the color I see at the start of this experiment. I'm going to indicate the color that I notice in each test tube once I add the iodine. And then last, I'm going to identify whether or not each tube contains a starch. And the way that I should know this is by referencing my control values. Again, I have a positive control, which should show a positive starch result, as well as a negative control, which should show a no starch result. So I'm going to get started here putting some solutions into my test tubes. I'm going to move this away for now. We'll come back to that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my test tubes in my test tube holder. And I do realize that this camera here, it makes it a little bit hard to see, but just so you guys can see there, this is test tube 1, test tube 2, and test tube 3. And so in test tube 1, I'm going to go ahead and put 10 drops of soluble starch solution in there. And so I've just got my starch solution here, and I'm going to go ahead and take 10 drops out of this beaker here and put it into my test tube. All right, so I've got my dropper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And you'll notice that it kind of gets stuck on the side there. That's okay. As long as I can mix it with my chemical iodine, I should be fine. I'm going to do the same for test tube 2. I'm going to go ahead and take my water solution now, or just my water, I should say. I'm going to take my water now, and I'm going to put 10 drops of water into test tube 2. All right. All right, there we go. So just a little bit of water in there. You can notice I don't need very much. That chemical indicator does not need a lot of solution in order for it to show us some results. And then finally, test tube 3. This is going to be where I put my stomach contents. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my stomach contents now. Look at that lovely color, straight from the crime scene. I'm excited to see what our results will show for our starch today. So here's my test tube 3. I'm going to put 10 drops. 1, 2, oh my gosh, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. There we go. All right, so just a little bit in the bottom there. Now comes the fun part, you guys. So we're going to go ahead and take our lab form here. We're going to take a look at how do we fill this out. Now I'm not going to go over this with every test, but I think for the first one that it might be helpful for us to go over some of these together. So I'm going to use big pen here to make sure it's nice and dark for you to see. And let's go ahead and start with our color at the start for each solution. So my positive control for starch. Here's what I've got here. If you want to see it against a white background, that might be helpful. So this solution is basically, I would describe it as a cloudy white. It's somewhat thick. We're just going to indicate the color here, and I'm just going to say it's cloudy and white. Okay, cloudy and white. You may do the same on your computer screen where you've got your digital lab pulled up. You could do that now. So now we're going to do the color at the start for the water. Fairly certain it's going to look like all the other water I've ever seen, which is just clear, and it is. And then finally for my stomach content solution, move that out of the way. My stomach content solution, you'll notice throughout the experiment, it's going to be this kind of orangish red color. So I'm going to go ahead and put orange. I don't know, I would say it's even kind of a light orange. I'm going to say light. All right, so I've got my color at the start, and now what I need to do for my next phase of the experiment is I'm going to go ahead and add that iodine. Now iodine, I'm going to put this here for now. Grab my iodine. Iodine is a chemical indicator that tells us if there is starch present. Now what should happen is when I put iodine into test tube 1, my positive control, I should see a chemical reaction occur. And so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to take some iodine. According to my instructions, it says I need to put 3 drops of iodine in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Test tube 1. So there's 1, 2, let's grab one more. I need to get a new dropper. I'm going to go ahead and grab a new dropper. I'll just use this one for now. Should have grabbed a new dropper before I started here. All right, here we go. We got 2 and 3. All right, so here's my results when I add that iodine to my starch solution. Now that is a huge difference. Again, I'll put that against a white backdrop so you can see it. We've started with the cloudy white solution. Now we've got a very dark, I would say it looks black or almost like a licorice color, like a dark black or almost a purple. Okay, so my result for my positive control, the color after adding iodine was dark. I would say dark purple. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same, except for this time we're going to add our drops of iodine to our water and see what kind of result we see after that. So we're going to go ahead and take our dropper again. I'm going to add 3 drops. 1, 2, and 3. Come on, there we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and swirl this around, see if there's a color change. And as you guys can see, and once again, I'll put that white backdrop on, definitely went from a clear watercolor to this yellowish color, but I wouldn't say that that is a chemical reaction, because as you can see, if I hold up the iodine solution itself is this dark orangish, dark yellow color. And so I would say there was no reaction here, but simply we see a mixture now of the water mixed with the iodine, and a mixture does not indicate a chemical reaction. Remember, a mixture can just be when 2 things come together and kind of blend, whereas a chemical reaction, we should notice a distinct change. And I don't see a big change here. I would say that that's a good result that we were expecting, a negative result. And so what I'll put for my data here, color after adding iodine, I would just say light yellow. And again, that light yellow doesn't indicate a chemical reaction. It just tells us that we have created a mixture here between the water and the iodine. And now is the goodies, right? This is what I really want to know. This is my stomach contents, the one that we're trying to figure out the composition of. And so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and put iodine in here, and then I want to see, does this solution, the stomach content solution, look more like the result from my positive control or my negative control? So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I've got my iodine here. Okay, and I'm going to suck up a bunch of iodine here, and I'm going to add 3 drops to this test tube. Here we go. 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to swirl it all around. I'm going to put this against a white backdrop so it's easier to see. And I would say that's a pretty strong reaction there. So what we want to think about now is, does this test tube, does this result look more like we saw the positive control or the negative control? And just to be sure, we can go ahead and hold those up now. I'll move this out of the way. So here's our test tube 3. So here's test tube 1. This is our positive control here. So if you put them side by side, I would say there's a pretty strong similarity between test tube 1, our positive control, and test tube 3, our unknown. So there you go, take a look at that. Then I'm going to swap out this test tube here, our positive control. I'm going to go ahead and put that next to the negative control now. Okay, so again, this is our negative control test tube 2, no reaction, versus our testable reaction here in test tube 3. So what you need to decide now, okay, what you need to decide now is, how are you going to fill out these last 3 parts? Okay, so students, what are you going to do now? What would you say the color was after adding iodine here? So you would go ahead and write into that spot, or type into that spot on your computer, what color would you say test tube 3 was after adding iodine? Okay, and then finally, was starch present in each one? I'm going to tell you, for this one, we know that if we're looking at a positive control, this should be a positive result. So I'm going to put a plus sign there. If I'm looking at a negative control, again, we should expect this to be a negative result. Okay. And now what you need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is decide, did I have starch in my unknown solution? Do you think that there was starch in our stomach contents? That's up to you to decide. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here. Again, what we have just done is we have tested for the presence of starch in our unknown solution. More to come later.